The shout that changed everything. The courtroom was a hive of activity, its polished wooden benches filled with lawyers, parents, and curious spectators. Judge Marcus Hensley, known for his unyielding demeanor and sharp judgment, sat atop the bench, presiding over yet another family case. The sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the room as the voices of attorneys debating echoed within the high ceilings. "Your Honor," began one of the lawyers, her tone firm but respectful, "we believe this arrangement is in the best interest of the child." Suddenly, a clear, unwavering voice interrupted, cutting through the courtroom's tension like a knife. "Judge, I'm your son." The room froze. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by hushed murmurs. Judge Hensley's gavel slipped from his hand, clattering against the bench. His normally composed face betrayed shock, confusion, and something deeper, fear. The judge scanned the room until his gaze landed on a boy standing near the back, his small frame trembling but his chin held high. The boy, around 12 years old, had deep brown skin and intense eyes that seemed far too wise for his age. His clothes were simple, a bit worn, but clean. His hands were balled into fists at his sides, and his lip quivered slightly as he repeated, "You're my dad." The lawyer froze mid-sentence, her file slipping from her hands. The bailiff took a step forward, ready to intervene, but Judge Hensley raised his hand, halting him. "Clear the courtroom," Marcus ordered, his voice hoarse. "Everyone except the boy, and Miss Clark." He nodded toward the social worker standing beside the boy, her expression a mixture of worry and compassion. As the spectators, lawyers, and reporters were ushered out, the air grew thick with tension. When the heavy wooden doors finally closed, the silence was deafening. "Approach the bench," Marcus said, his voice steadier now, but still tinged with uncertainty. "What's your name, son?" The boy hesitated, his resolve faltering for just a moment before he straightened his shoulders. "Elijah," he said. "Elijah Carter. But I don't know my real last name. The orphanage just gave me that one." Miss Clark gently placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, stepping forward. "Your Honor, Elijah has been in the state's care since infancy. He has no listed parents, but recently he discovered something in his file." Elijah interrupted, his voice filled with urgency. "It was a picture of you and my mom." The room seemed to shrink. Marcus's throat tightened as a flood of long-buried memories surged forward. He stood, walked down from the bench, and extended his hand toward Miss Clark. "May I see it?" She hesitated but nodded, retrieving a small, worn photograph from her file. As Marcus took it, his hands trembled. The image hit him like a lightning bolt. There he was, nearly 15 years younger, standing beside a woman with warm eyes and an infectious smile. Sarah. Her name echoed in his mind like a forgotten melody. On the back of the photo, a date was scrawled in neat handwriting. It aligned almost perfectly with the timeline of Elijah's birth. "This isn't possible," Marcus muttered, shaking his head as if trying to wake from a dream. He looked up at the boy again, his gaze softer now, searching for something familiar. Where did you find this?" Elijah stepped closer, his voice growing smaller, but no less steady. "In my file at the orphanage. They said you didn't know about me, but I had to come find you. I had to know." The weight of Elijah's words sank into Marcus like an anchor. The boy's face, his determined eyes, and even the slight tilt of his chin, it was all so achingly familiar. "I'll need a moment," Marcus said, gesturing for Miss Clark to follow him into chambers. Elijah started to follow, but Marcus held up his hand. "Stay here, son. I'll be right back." Once the door closed behind them, Marcus turned to Miss Clark, his voice barely a whisper. "How long have you known about this?" "We didn't know anything definitive until Elijah found that photo," she explained, her tone apologetic but firm. "He's resourceful. He pieced things together and has been, well, watching your cases for months." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Watching me. Why? He's been trying to work up the courage to speak to you, Miss Clark replied. He's convinced you're his father, and frankly, the evidence is compelling. He doesn't want anything from you except the truth. The judge ran a hand through his graying hair, a habit he reserved for his most challenging cases. Does he want a relationship? Miss Clark hesitated before answering. More than anything. But there's something else. Elijah has a younger friend at the orphanage, Sammy. They're inseparable. Any family interested in adopting Elijah would need to take Sammy too. But so far, no one has come forward for both. Marcus rubbed his temples, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. For the first time in his career, he had no idea what to do. When they returned to the courtroom, Elijah was sitting quietly in the front row, his small hands gripping the edge of the bench. He looked up as they entered, hope flickering in his eyes. Marcus cleared his throat. Elijah, I don't have all the answers yet, but I promise you this. I'll help you find the truth. And whatever happens, you won't face it alone. Elijah nodded, his eyes welling with tears. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. The quiet bond. The next morning, Judge Marcus Hensley sat in his home office, staring at the photograph Elijah had handed him the previous day. The woman's warm smile, the tilt of her head, and the familiarity in her eyes brought a rush of memories he had long buried. Sarah, she had been a whirlwind in his life, a bright, fleeting storm that disappeared as quickly as she had come. And now, after all these years, a boy stood before him claiming to be the product of that time. Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, Elijah's words echoed in his mind. Judge, I'm your son. They were spoken with such conviction, such raw desperation, that Marcus couldn't ignore them. He needed answers, not just for himself, but for the boy who had stirred something deep within him, a feeling he thought he had long buried. A knock at the door startled him. Anna, his wife, stood in the doorway, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. Marcus, the social worker, called. They want to know if you'll visit Elijah and his friend today. Marcus hesitated. His friend. Sammy. Anna said, stepping into the room. The boy he's been looking after, apparently. They're inseparable. The social worker mentioned something about Sammy's health. Asthma, maybe, or something more serious. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. I don't know, Anna. This is all so complicated. If I'm not his father. But what if you are? Anna interrupted gently. She sat down across from him, her eyes searching his. That boy stood up in front of an entire courtroom to tell you he's your son. Do you know how much courage that takes? You need to see him again, even if it's just to get some clarity. After a moment, Marcus nodded. I'll go. Later that afternoon, Marcus arrived at the orphanage. The building was old but well kept, its walls adorned with colorful murals painted by the children who lived there. Inside, the sound of laughter and tiny footsteps echoed through the hallways. A woman with a kind face and a clipboard greeted him. Judge Hensley, thank you for coming. I'm Miss Clark, she said, extending her hand. Elijah and Sammy are in the playroom. I'll take you to them. As they walked, Miss Clark filled him in on the boys. Elijah has been with us since he was an infant. Sammy arrived 3 years ago. He has a congenital heart condition, which complicates things. Most families hesitate to adopt children with serious medical needs. Marcus frowned. And Elijah? How does he fit into this? Elijah has taken on the role of Sammy's protector, Miss Clark said, her voice tinged with admiration. He's like a big brother to him. Wherever Elijah goes, Sammy follows. And Elijah wouldn't dream of being separated from him. When they entered the playroom, Marcus saw the 2 boys sitting on the floor in a corner, surrounded by a small pile of books. Sammy, a smaller boy with soft features and wide, curious eyes, was holding a comic book while Elijah read aloud. "Elijah," Miss Clark called softly. "There's someone here to see you." Elijah's head snapped up. When he saw Marcus, his face lit up with a mixture of surprise and hope. Sammy, clutching his comic book, moved closer to Elijah, his small hand gripping his friend's sleeve. Marcus approached slowly, his gaze shifting between the boys. "Hello, Elijah," he said, his voice soft. "And you must be Sammy." Sammy nodded shyly, his grip on Elijah tightening. Elijah, however, stood up, his chin held high. "Hi, Judge Hensley," he said. "I mean, Dad." The word hung in the air, heavy and full of unspoken questions. Marcus hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Instead, he crouched down to their level. "Elijah, I need to talk to you about what you said in court." Elijah nodded, his expression serious. "I meant it. I think you're my dad." "The picture." "I saw the picture," Marcus interrupted gently. "But we need to confirm things. It's not as simple as a photograph." Sammy's small voice broke the tension. "Are you going to take Elijah away?" Both Marcus and Miss Clark turned to the younger boy, who was now clutching Elijah's hand as though his life depended on it. His wide, frightened eyes pierced through Marcus's heart. "No one's taking anyone away," Miss Clark said firmly. "We're just talking." Elijah knelt beside Sammy, placing a reassuring arm around his shoulders. "It's okay, Sammy. I promised I wouldn't leave you, and I won't." Watching the interaction, Marcus felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. Despite his small size and young age, Elijah carried himself like a protector, someone who had been forced to grow up far too soon. "Do you boys like books?" Anna's voice startled them all. She had slipped into the room unnoticed, carrying a small stack of picture books she had picked up on the way. Elijah eyed her warily, but Sammy's curiosity got the better of him. "I like books," he said softly. Anna knelt beside them, holding out a brightly colored book. "This one's about space. It's one of my favorites." Sammy's eyes lit up as he took the book, flipping through its pages with awe. Elijah, still cautious, watched her closely. "I'm Anna," she said, smiling at him. "Marcus's wife." Elijah relaxed slightly, his posture softening. "You like space?" he asked. "I love it," Anna replied. "Did you know some stars are so far away that the light we see from them started traveling millions of years ago?" Sammy's jaw dropped. Millions of years. Elijah smiled for the first time, a small tentative smile that warmed Anna's heart. "I didn't know that," he admitted. For the next hour, the four of them sat together, flipping through books and talking about everything from constellations to favorite foods. Marcus observed quietly, taking in the way Anna easily connected with the boys, how Elijah slowly let his guard down, and how Sammy clung to Elijah as though he were his lifeline. When it was time to leave, Elijah stood and faced Marcus. "Are you coming back?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be back. I promise." As he walked out of the orphanage, Marcus felt the weight of Elijah's question linger in his chest. This wasn't just about biology anymore. It was about responsibility, about a bond that had already begun to form, a bond he couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, Marcus felt unsure of his next steps. But one thing was certain: Elijah and Sammy had already changed his life. Whether he was ready or not, he was being drawn into their world, a world where love, loyalty, and courage meant everything. A promise and a secret. The hum of the city traffic outside the courthouse was muffled by the thick walls of Judge Marcus Hensley's chambers. He sat at his desk, his fingers lightly drumming against the polished wood as he reviewed the DNA test papers spread out before him. Each word on the page felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He had thought he was prepared for the result, but nothing could have readied him for the truth. 99.8% probability of paternity. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. The confirmation brought relief, but also a flood of guilt. He had a son, a child he hadn't known existed for 12 years. Elijah had spent his entire life in the foster system, while Marcus lived in relative comfort, completely unaware. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Anna stepped in, her expression a mix of determination and compassion. In her hands, she carried a small, neatly wrapped gift box. "Marcus," she began, closing the door behind her. "I thought you'd want to give this to Elijah when you see him today." He eyed the box curiously. "What is it?" "A watch," Anna replied. "It was your father's, remember? You told me once that he gave it to you when you were about Elijah's age." Marcus's throat tightened as he took the box from her. The weight of the gift, both physical and symbolic, sank into his hands. "Do you think I'm ready for this, Anna? For being a father to a boy who's been through so much?" Anna placed her hands on his shoulders, her gaze steady. "No one's ever fully ready for something like this, Marcus. But the fact that you care enough to worry about it tells me you're already doing better than most." Later that day, Marcus arrived at the orphanage. Miss Clark greeted him at the entrance, her demeanor professional yet warm. "He's in the library with Sammy," she said. "They've been waiting for you." Marcus nodded, following her down the hallway. The library was small but cozy, its walls lined with shelves of books, many of them donated over the years. In the corner, Elijah sat with Sammy, their heads bent over a large atlas. They were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't notice Marcus enter. "See," Elijah was saying, pointing to a map. "If we lived here, Alaska, we'd get to see the northern lights almost every night." Sammy's eyes widened. "Really? Lights in the sky? Like magic?" Elijah grinned. "Not magic. It's science. But yeah, it kind of looks like magic. Can you show me sometime?" Sammy asked, his voice filled with wonder. Elijah's grin faltered slightly, his gaze lowering. "Maybe. Someday. How about I take you both to see them someday?" Marcus said, stepping forward. Both boys looked up, startled. Elijah quickly masked his surprise, but Sammy broke into a wide smile. "You mean it? If it's okay with Elijah," Marcus added, looking at his son. Elijah shrugged, trying to seem nonchalant, but the flicker of hope in his eyes betrayed him. "Sure, that'd be cool." Marcus sat down across from them, holding the small gift box in his lap. "I brought you something, Elijah." The boy frowned, his guard immediately going up. "Why?" "Because I want to," Marcus said simply, sliding the box across the table. Elijah hesitated before picking it up. He unwrapped it carefully, his expression unreadable as he lifted the watch from the box. It was an old, sturdy timepiece with a leather strap, the kind of thing that never went out of style. "It belonged to my father," Marcus explained. "He gave it to me when I was about your age. I thought you might like it." Elijah turned the watch over in his hands, studying it closely. "Why would you give me something this nice?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady but soft. "Because you're my son. And I want you to have something that connects us." Elijah's grip tightened on the watch, his expression conflicted. He glanced at Sammy, who gave him an encouraging nod, before finally slipping it onto his wrist. It hung loosely, but Elijah didn't seem to mind. "Thanks," he mumbled, looking away. "It's nice." Sammy's face lit up as he leaned closer to examine the watch. "Whoa, that's so cool, Elijah. Now you look like a superhero or something." Elijah couldn't suppress a small smile at Sammy's enthusiasm, but his eyes flicked back to Marcus, filled with unspoken questions. As the three of them sat together, Miss Clark entered with a tray of snacks and drinks. "I thought you all might need a break," she said, setting the tray down on a nearby table. While Sammy eagerly grabbed a cookie, Elijah remained quiet, staring at the watch on his wrist. Marcus noticed his son's silence and decided to break it. "Elijah, there's something I need to tell you," Marcus began carefully. "I got the test results back. You are my son." Elijah froze, his eyes snapping to Marcus. For a moment, he said nothing, his expression a mixture of shock and relief. "You mean "It's true. You're really my dad." Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "Yes, and I'm sorry I didn't know about you sooner." "If I had." "You didn't know." Elijah interrupted, his tone sharp. "So, what? You just forgot about my mom?" The question hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. "It's not that simple," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Your mom and we lost touch. I didn't know she was pregnant. If I had known, I would have." "You would have what?" Elijah snapped, his voice rising. "Save me from all this." He gestured around the room, his frustration spilling over. "It's too late for that." Sammy flinched at Elijah's outburst, clutching his comic book tightly. Miss Clark stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Marcus raised a hand to stop her. "You're right," Marcus admitted, his voice calm. "I can't change the past, but I can be here now, and I want to be, if you'll let me." Elijah's shoulders sagged, the anger draining from him as quickly as it had come. He looked at Sammy, who was watching him with wide, worried eyes, and sighed. "I don't know if I can trust you," he admitted quietly. "That's fair," Marcus said. "Trust takes time, and I'm willing to earn it." Elijah didn't respond, but the fact that he didn't leave or push Marcus away entirely was a small victory. That evening, as Marcus drove home, his mind raced. He had started a journey he wasn't sure he was equipped for, but one thing was certain: Elijah was his son, and he wasn't going to let him down. In the back of his mind, he also thought about Sammy. The bond between the two boys was undeniable, and separating them would be cruel. For the first time, Marcus began to wonder if his future might include not just one boy, but two. Two bonds, one family. The sun dipped low on the horizon as Marcus pulled into the driveway of his modest suburban home. The day had been long and emotionally draining, but his thoughts were consumed by two faces: Elijah and Sammy. Their bond was unshakable, their need for each other palpable. As he entered the house, Anna greeted him in the foyer, her eyes searching his for answers. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and concern. Marcus exhaled deeply, setting his briefcase by the door. "He's my son," he said simply. The weight of those words seemed to settle over the entire house. The DNA test confirmed it. Anna's face softened, her lips curving into a bittersweet smile. "And how did he take it?" "He's angry," Marcus admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Angry that I didn't know. Angry that he's been left to fend for himself all these years. And honestly, he has every right to be." Anna placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "What about Sammy?" Marcus hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "That's the part I'm struggling with. Those boys are inseparable. I don't think I can take Elijah without Sammy, and I don't think I could ever look either of them in the eye if I tried." Anna stepped closer, her voice firm but gentle. "Then you don't take one without the other. Marcus, you're not just choosing Elijah. You're choosing both of them." The next day, Marcus returned to the orphanage, determined to learn more about Sammy. Miss Clark met him in her office, her ever-present clipboard resting on the desk. "Sammy's a special case," she began, her tone serious. "His asthma is just the tip of the iceberg. He has a congenital heart condition, tetralogy of Fallot. He's stable right now, but he's going to need surgery in the future. It's manageable, but it's a lot for most families to take on." Marcus nodded, absorbing the information. "And Elijah?" "Elijah's the reason Sammy is thriving as much as he is," Miss Clark said with a small smile. "He's more than just a big brother to Sammy. He's his protector, his cheerleader, his everything. That kind of bond doesn't come around often." Marcus leaned back in his chair, the gravity of the situation settling over him. "If I adopt Elijah, it means taking Sammy too." Miss Clark nodded. "It's not legally required, but it's the right thing to do. Separating them would be devastating for both of them." When Marcus entered the playroom, He found Elijah and Sammy sitting on the floor, engrossed in a game of chess. Sammy's small fingers hovered over the board, his face scrunched in concentration. "Your move," Elijah said, a teasing smile tugging at his lips. Sammy bit his lip, his hand darting forward to move a pawn. "Ha! Got you now." Elijah laughed, shaking his head. "You wish, Sammy. That move just opened up your king." Before Sammy could respond, they noticed Marcus standing in the doorway. Sammy's eyes lit up, but Elijah's expression was guarded, his smile fading. "Hey, Judge Hensley," Elijah said, his tone neutral. "Hi, Elijah." "Sammy," Marcus replied, stepping into the room. He crouched down beside them, his gaze flicking to the chessboard. "Looks like a pretty intense game." Sammy grinned. "I'm winning." Elijah smirked. "He thinks he's winning." Marcus chuckled, but his demeanor grew serious as he looked at Elijah. "Elijah, can we talk? Just you and me." Elijah hesitated, glancing at Sammy, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay," he said, standing up. "Sammy, don't cheat while I'm gone." "I would never," Sammy said with a mock gasp, earning a rare smile from Elijah. Marcus led Elijah to a quiet corner of the library. The boy sat on the edge of a chair, his posture tense. Marcus sat across from him, folding his hands on the table. "Elijah," Marcus began, choosing his words carefully, "I want you to know that I don't just want to be in your life. I want to be your father. For real." Elijah's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing. "I know that you're angry," Marcus continued, "and I don't blame you. But I want to make things right. I want to give you a home, a family." Elijah shifted in his seat, his gaze dropping to the table. "What about Sammy?" Marcus smiled softly. "Sammy is part of the deal. I wouldn't dream of separating you two." Elijah's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "You mean that? You're not just saying it to make me happy." "I mean it," Marcus said firmly. "If you'll let me, I want to adopt both of you." For a moment, Elijah said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, his voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Why? Why would you want to take us both on?" "Sammy's sick. He's a lot of work." "Because family isn't about convenience," Marcus replied. "It's about love. And I can see how much you love Sammy. I'd be honored to give both of you the home you deserve." Tears welled up in Elijah's eyes, but he quickly wiped them away with the sleeve of his shirt. "You promise?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You won't change your mind?" Marcus reached across the table, placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "I promise." That evening, Marcus and Anna sat in the orphanage's conference room with Miss Clark to finalize the adoption process. Elijah and Sammy were in the playroom, unaware of the life-changing decision happening just down the hall. "The process will take some time," Miss Clark explained, sliding a stack of paperwork across the table. "But considering your circumstances, we can expedite things." Anna nodded, taking Marcus's hand. "We're ready." As they signed the documents, Marcus felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in years, he knew he was doing something truly meaningful. He wasn't just adopting a son. He was embracing a family. When they returned to the playroom, Elijah and Sammy were building a tower out of blocks. Sammy looked up first, his face lighting up when he saw Marcus and Anna. "Did you finish?" Sammy asked excitedly. Marcus crouched down, ruffling the boy's hair. "We did. You and Elijah are coming home with us." Sammy gasped, his hands flying to his mouth. "Really?" Elijah stood up slowly, his expression a mixture of shock and cautious hope. "You mean it? We're really going home?" Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "We're really going home. All of us." Elijah's face crumpled, and he threw his arms around Marcus, burying his face in his shoulder. Sammy quickly joined in, wrapping his small arms around both of them. In that moment, Marcus knew he had made the right choice. This wasn't just about giving Elijah and Sammy a home. It was about creating a family where love and loyalty would always come first. Building a home. The sound of laughter echoed through the Hensley house as Marcus stood in the living room, watching Elijah and Sammy dart around the space. Sammy was pretending to be a superhero, using a blanket as a makeshift cape, while Elijah was his arch-nemesis, chasing him with a foamed sword. It had been a week since they moved in, and the house, once quiet and orderly, now brimmed with energy and life. Anna stepped beside Marcus, handing him a cup of coffee. "You're smiling," she observed, her voice warm. Marcus chuckled softly. "It's different. Good, but different." Anna leaned her head against his shoulder. "You're doing great, Marcus." They're happy, and that's what matters. But Marcus knew it wasn't all laughter and games. Beneath Elijah's tough exterior and Sammy's bubbly personality lay scars from years of uncertainty and hardship. Building trust and a sense of stability would take time, a fact that became clear every evening when the boys hesitated at bedtime, clinging to their newfound sense of security. Later that night, Marcus sat on the edge of Elijah's bed, watching him fidget with the leather strap of the watch Marcus had given him. Sammy was already asleep in the next room, his gentle snores muffled by the walls. "You okay, Elijah?" Marcus asked gently. Elijah nodded but didn't look up. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" Elijah hesitated, his fingers tightening around the watch. "About if this is real. If you really want us here." The question hit Marcus harder than he expected. He placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Elijah, I didn't just bring you and Sammy here because I felt obligated. I brought you here because I want you to be part of my family. Both of you." Elijah finally looked up, his eyes shimmering with uncertainty. "But what if Sammy gets sick again? What if it's too much?" "It won't be too much," Marcus assured him. "We'll face it together, as a family. That's what families do." For a moment, Elijah said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Okay." The next morning, the Hensleys began their new routine. Marcus, who had adjusted his work schedule to accommodate the boys, prepared breakfast, while Anna helped Sammy with his inhaler and medications. Elijah watched from the kitchen table, his expression unreadable. "Elijah, could you help Sammy pack his lunch for school?" Anna asked, trying to draw him out of his shell. Elijah shrugged but complied, his movements careful and deliberate as he arranged a sandwich and snacks in Sammy's lunchbox. Sammy beamed up at him. "Thanks, Elijah." The small exchange brought a flicker of a smile to Elijah's face. Marcus noticed it and felt a pang of hope. Slowly but surely, they were finding their rhythm. At school, Sammy thrived under the care of his attentive teachers and the support of Elijah, who kept a watchful eye on him during recess. However, the transition wasn't without challenges. Some kids teased Sammy for his frequent doctor visits and his reliance on an inhaler. Elijah, ever the protector, didn't hesitate to step in, earning himself a few trips to the principal's office for his efforts. One afternoon, Marcus received a call from the school. Elijah got into a fight, the principal informed him. He was defending Sammy. When Marcus arrived at the school, he found Elijah sitting outside the principal's office, his arms crossed and a defiant look on his face. Marcus crouched down in front of him, his voice calm but firm. "What happened?" "They were picking on Sammy," Elijah said, his tone defensive, calling him weak and stuff. "I told them to stop, but they wouldn't." Marcus nodded, understanding the fire behind Elijah's actions. "I appreciate that you want to protect Sammy, Elijah, but fighting isn't the way to solve these problems." Elijah's eyes flashed with frustration. "Then what am I supposed to do? Just let them say whatever they want?" "No," Marcus said gently, "but there are other ways to stand up for Sammy, ways that don't get you into trouble. Let's talk about those, okay?" Elijah nodded reluctantly, and Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're a good brother, Elijah, but part of being a good brother is knowing when to fight and when to use your words. That evening, Marcus and Elijah had a heart-to-heart over the chessboard in the living room. Marcus used the game as a metaphor, explaining how strategy and patience often led to better outcomes than brute force. "You don't always have to knock over the king to win," Marcus said, moving his knight. "Sometimes it's about positioning yourself to protect the pieces that matter most." Elijah considered the words, his brow furrowing as he studied the board. "Like Sammy." "Exactly," Marcus said with a smile. "You're his protector, Elijah. And sometimes that means finding the smartest way to keep him safe." Elijah nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I'll try." The days turned into weeks, and the Hensleys began to feel like a true family. Elijah grew more comfortable, his guarded demeanor softening as he realized Marcus and Anna weren't going anywhere. Sammy's health improved under the watchful care of his new parents, and his laughter became a constant presence in the house. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Sammy looked up from his plate and said, "This is the best family ever." Elijah smirked, but there was a glint of agreement in his eyes. Marcus reached across the table, ruffling Sammy's hair. "And it's only going to get better." For the first time in years, Marcus felt a sense of fulfillment he couldn't describe. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Sammy's medical challenges and Elijah's lingering fears were hurdles they would face together. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. Trust takes root. After dinner, the family gathered in the living room. Sammy curled up on the couch with his favorite blanket, holding onto a stuffed bear that Anna had bought for him. Elijah sat cross-legged on the rug, pretending to read a book but clearly listening to the conversation between Marcus and Anna. "So, tomorrow is your first doctor's visit with Dr. Peterson," Anna said, addressing Sammy. "She's the best pediatric cardiologist in the city." Sammy nodded, his fingers nervously picking at the edge of his blanket. "Will it hurt?" Anna shook her head, her voice soothing. "Not at all. She's just going to check on your heart to make sure everything's working the way it should." Sammy seemed to relax at her reassurance, but Elijah tensed. "What if they say he needs surgery?" Elijah asked, his voice sharp with worry. "What if something goes wrong?" Marcus leaned forward, his tone calm and steady. "If that happens, we'll deal with it together. Sammy's not alone anymore. Neither of you are." Elijah looked away, his jaw tightening. "That's what everyone says. Until it gets too hard." The room grew quiet. Marcus didn't rush to respond. He knew Elijah's fears weren't baseless. Instead, he leaned back and spoke with quiet determination. "You're right, Elijah. A lot of people do give up when things get hard, but I'm not one of them. You and Sammy are my sons now, and I'm not going anywhere." Elijah studied Marcus for a long moment, as if searching for any hint of insincerity. Finally, he nodded, though his expression remained cautious. "Okay, but I'm holding you to that." Marcus smiled. "Good. I wouldn't expect anything less." The next day, the family made their way to the hospital for Sammy's appointment. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air as they walked through the brightly lit halls. Sammy clung to Anna's hand, his eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Elijah stayed close behind, his protective instincts kicking in. In the waiting room, Sammy flipped through a picture book while Elijah sat stiffly beside him, his gaze darting around the room. Marcus leaned over to Elijah, speaking quietly. "You don't have to stay so tense, you know. Sammy's in good hands. I just don't like hospitals," Elijah muttered. "They always mean something bad's gonna happen." Marcus nodded, understanding the boy's unease. "Sometimes they mean something good too, like helping Sammy feel better." Elijah didn't respond, but he seemed to relax slightly. The doctor's visit went smoothly. Dr. Peterson, a warm woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, explained Sammy's condition in simple terms and praised Marcus and Anna for being proactive. "He's stable for now," she said, smiling at Sammy. "But we'll need to schedule surgery within the next 6 months. The sooner we address the issue, the better his long-term outlook. Marcus nodded, though he couldn't ignore the knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. Sammy, blissfully unaware of the gravity of the situation, grinned up at the doctor. "Do I get a sticker?" Dr. Peterson laughed, pulling a sheet of colorful stickers from her desk. "You get two." As they left the hospital, Sammy clutched his stickers proudly, and Elijah seemed more at ease. But as they drove home, Elijah spoke up from the back seat. "What if something happens during the surgery?" Marcus glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Dr. Peterson is one of the best, Elijah. We'll make sure Sammy gets the care he needs." Elijah nodded but didn't seem entirely convinced. I can't lose him." "You won't," Marcus said firmly. "I promise." That night, as Marcus tucked Sammy into bed, the boy whispered, "Do you think Elijah's okay?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Why do you ask?" Sammy shrugged, his voice small. "He gets scared a lot. But he doesn't say it. He just gets quiet." Marcus ruffled Sammy's hair. "Elijah's brave, just like you. But even brave people get scared sometimes. That's why we're here, to help each other through it." Sammy smiled sleepily, his eyelids drooping. "Okay. Good night, Dad." The words hit Marcus like a bolt of warmth. He kissed Sammy's forehead, his heart swelling. "Good night, buddy." In the living room, Marcus found Elijah staring out the window, his arms crossed. "Can't sleep?" Marcus asked, sitting down on the couch. Elijah shrugged. "Too much on my mind." Marcus nodded, giving him space to talk. After a long silence, Elijah finally spoke. "When Sammy came to the orphanage, he wouldn't stop crying. I was the only one who could calm him down. I promised I'd never let anything bad happen to him. And you've done an incredible job," Marcus said. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore." Elijah turned to face him, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if something happens that I can't fix? What if I fail him?" "You won't fail him," Marcus said gently. "But there will be times when things are out of your control. That's where Anna and I come in. We're a team now, Elijah. We'll face everything together." Elijah's eyes softened, and for the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of trust in them. "Okay," he said quietly, "but I'm still going to protect him." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Marcus replied with a smile. As Elijah headed to bed, Marcus sat alone in the living room, a deep sense of responsibility settling over him. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it. He wasn't just building a home for Elijah and Sammy. He was building a family, one brick of trust at a time. A family forged in strength. The crisp morning air carried the faint scent of dew as Marcus stood in the backyard, watching Elijah and Sammy kick a soccer ball back and forth. It was a Saturday, their first weekend without appointments or obligations since the boys had moved in. The golden sunlight glinted off the watch on Elijah's wrist as he darted after the ball, his movements quick and precise. Sammy's laughter filled the yard as he ran after Elijah, his small legs working hard to keep up. "Elijah, pass it. I'm open." Elijah glanced over his shoulder, a grin spreading across his face. "You better be ready, Sammy." He sent the ball rolling gently in his brother's direction, giving him a chance to shine. Marcus smiled from the porch, his coffee warming his hands as Anna joined him. "They're really starting to settle in," she said, leaning against the railing. Elijah's smiling more, laughing, even. Marcus nodded. "It's a start, but I know he's still holding back. He's carrying so much weight for someone his age." Anna placed a hand on his arm. "And he's starting to trust us, Marcus. That's what matters. Trust takes time." After lunch, Marcus took the boys on a trip to the local park. The place was bustling with families, children running and playing, and parents chatting on benches. Sammy's eyes lit up at the sight of the playground, but Elijah hesitated, hanging back. "Go on, Elijah," Marcus encouraged. "Sammy's been talking about this playground all week. He'll need his big brother protector on the slide." Elijah smirked but didn't move. "I'll just wash for now." Marcus nodded, understanding the boy's need for space. "Fair enough. But if Sammy gets stuck on the monkey bars, I'm calling you." Elijah rolled his eyes but cracked a small smile. Meanwhile, Sammy was already scaling the jungle gym, his squeals of excitement drawing other children to join him. As the afternoon wore on, Sammy grew tired, leaning against Elijah on the bench. "I think I need my inhaler," he murmured. Elijah immediately sprang into action, fishing the device from Sammy's backpack and helping him use it. Marcus watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride at Elijah's attentiveness. "You're doing a great job with him," Marcus said when he approached. "You know that, right?" Elijah shrugged, his expression guarded. "I've been looking out for him for years. It's just what I do." "Still," Marcus said, sitting beside him, "it's impressive. You've got a big heart, Elijah. And you've been through a lot." Elijah stared at the ground, his fingers fidgeting with the watch strap. "It's just hard, you know. Trusting people. Every time someone said they'd adopt us, it always fell apart." Marcus placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "That's not going to happen this time. I'm not going anywhere. Neither is Anna. We're in this for the long haul." Elijah looked up at him, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "You mean it?" "I mean it," Marcus said firmly. "No matter what happens, we're family now." That evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Anna suggested a game night. Sammy eagerly pulled out a board game while Elijah sat cross-legged on the floor, pretending to be uninterested but secretly watching everyone's moves. The laughter and playful banter flowed easily as the game progressed. Sammy accused Anna of cheating, earning a mock gasp of protest. Marcus tried to bluff his way through a losing strategy, much to Elijah's amusement. By the time the game ended, Sammy was dozing off against Anna's shoulder, and Elijah was grinning ear to ear. Marcus caught the boy's gaze and winked, earning a shy smile in return. The following week brought another challenge: a meeting with Sammy's cardiologist to schedule the surgery. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on the entire family, especially Elijah. The night before the meeting, Marcus found Elijah sitting alone on the back porch, staring at the stars. He joined him, sitting silently for a while before speaking. "Big day tomorrow," Marcus said softly. Elijah nodded, his hands clenched into fists on his lap. "What if something goes wrong? What if he doesn't make it?" Marcus took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I won't lie to you, Elijah. Surgery is always a little scary. But Sammy's strong, and he's got the best doctors looking out for him. And no matter what happens, we'll be there for him. Together." Elijah's voice trembled as he spoke. "I promised him I'd never leave him alone." "And you haven't," Marcus said. "You've done everything you could to protect him. But now it's our turn to protect both of you." Elijah looked at Marcus, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What if I'm not enough?" Marcus reached over, placing a firm hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You're more than enough, Elijah. But you don't have to carry everything by yourself anymore. That's what family is for." For the first time, Elijah leaned into the comfort being offered, letting Marcus pull him into a hug. It was tentative at first, but then he held on tightly, his walls finally beginning to crack. The next day, as the family sat in the hospital waiting room, the weight of the moment pressed down on all of them. Sammy was cheerful despite his nerves, chattering about superheroes and asking the nurse if he'd get to wear a cool mask during the surgery. Elijah sat beside him, his leg bouncing anxiously. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "He's going to be okay," he said, his voice steady. When it was time for Sammy to go into the operating room, he waved at Elijah, Anna, and Marcus with a sleepy smile. "See you soon." The hours that followed were some of the longest of Marcus's life. Elijah paced the waiting room, while Anna sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Marcus alternated between reading magazines and checking his watch, each tick of the second hand feeling like an eternity. Finally, Dr. Peterson emerged, her smile putting them all at ease. "The surgery went perfectly," she announced. "Sammy's going to be just fine." Elijah collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands as relief washed over him. Marcus sat beside him, placing a hand on his back. "He's okay, Elijah. You did it. We did it." Elijah looked up, his eyes red but filled with gratitude. "Thanks, Dad." That night, as the family gathered around Sammy's hospital bed, the little boy grinned sleepily at them. "We're like the Avengers," he said, his voice soft. "All of us. A team." Elijah laughed, ruffling Sammy's hair. "Yeah, Sammy, we're a team." Marcus watched his sons, his heart full. For the first time, he truly felt the bond of a father with his children. A bond forged not by blood alone, but by love, trust, and unwavering strength. The Hensleys were a family now, and no challenge could break them. A new chapter begins. The days following Sammy's surgery were a blur of recovery and celebration. The doctors were thrilled with Sammy's progress, and the little boy quickly returned to his energetic, curious self. The Hensleys turned their home into a hub of love and activity, with Sammy's superhero drawings plastered across the fridge and Elijah's growing book collection taking over the living room shelves. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Marcus tapped his glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. "I have an announcement," he said, smiling at the curious faces around him. Sammy tilted his head, his fork paused midair. "Is it about dessert?" Anna chuckled, patting Sammy's head. "Not quite, sweetheart." Marcus looked at Elijah, his voice softening. "I've been thinking a lot about how far we've come, about what it means to be a family. And I realize that we haven't officially made this house your home yet." Elijah froze, his fork clattering onto his plate. "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled out a stack of papers from a folder sitting beside him. "Anna and I talked to Miss Clark and the adoption agency. We've signed the paperwork to make everything official. Elijah, Sammy, you're both our sons now, on paper and in our hearts." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Sammy's eyes widened, and he jumped up, wrapping his arms around Marcus's neck. "Really? You mean forever?" Marcus hugged him tightly. "Forever." Elijah remained seated, his expression unreadable. But as Marcus looked at him, he saw the emotion simmering beneath the surface. Slowly, Elijah stood and approached the table, his hands trembling as he reached for the papers. "Is this?" Elijah's voice cracked. "This means no one can take us away, right?" Marcus nodded, his own voice thick with emotion. "No one. You're stuck with us now." Elijah's walls finally crumbled. He threw his arms around Marcus, holding on tightly as tears streamed down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Anna joined the hug, pulling Sammy into the circle. "We're a family now," she said softly. "And nothing will ever change that." The following weekend, the Hensleys celebrated their new beginning with a small party. Friends, neighbors, and even Miss Clark attended, all eager to welcome Elijah and Sammy into the community. The backyard was filled with laughter, the scent of barbecue wafting through the air as children played games and adults chatted over lemonade. Sammy, wearing his favorite superhero cape, darted between the guests, proudly introducing himself as Sammy Hensley. Elijah stood nearby, watching with a small smile, his newfound sense of belonging evident in the way he carried himself. Marcus approached Elijah, handing him a glass of soda. "How are you holding up?" Elijah shrugged, his smile growing. "It's weird. Good weird. I didn't think this kind of thing happened in real life." Marcus clinked his glass against Elijah's. "Well, believe it. This is your life now." Elijah hesitated, then said, "I'm still not used to calling you Dad, but I like it." Marcus ruffled his hair, his heart swelling with pride. "Take your time. I'll still be here when you're ready." As the sun set and the party wound down, the family sat together around a fire pit in the backyard. Sammy, wrapped in a blanket, rested his head on Anna's lap while Elijah poked at the fire with a stick, watching the embers dance in the night air. Marcus looked around at his family, a deep sense of peace settling over him. They had come so far from the courtroom where it all began, a scared boy standing in front of a judge, desperate for a connection. Now, they were a family in every sense of the word. "You know," Marcus said, breaking the comfortable silence, "we've been through a lot to get here, but I wouldn't change a single thing." Elijah glanced at him, a faint smile on his lips. "Me neither." Sammy stirred, his voice groggy but filled with warmth. "This is the best family ever." Marcus reached over, squeezing Elijah's shoulder and brushing a hand through Sammy's hair. "It's only going to get better, kiddo." And as the fire crackled and the stars twinkled overhead, the Hensleys sat together, united by the love they had built, the challenges they had overcome, and the promise of a brighter future. They were more than a family. They were a team, stronger than ever, and nothing could break them.